Hi, I'm Alyssa Milano, and this is the story of how I stood up to my controlling family and carved out my own path. It wasn't easy, but sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most freeing outcomes. I'm 23 years old and just weeks away from graduating from Albany University with honors. On paper, I'm everything a family like mine could ever hope for: smart, accomplished, poised. The golden child, as they like to call me. Sounds perfect, right? But let me tell you a little secret: being perfect is exhausting. Alyssa, darling, straighten your posture. A Milano always stands tall. My grandmother Mia's sharp voice cuts through the silence as I step into the family mansion. It doesn't matter how quietly I try to sneak in, she always notices. Sometimes, I'm convinced the woman has eyes in the back of her head. Yes, grandmother, I reply, forcing a smile that feels more like a grimace. It's not that I don't love my family. I do. But my grandmother? She's an unstoppable force of nature. She walks like a queen and talks like a general, her words sharp enough to pierce through anyone's confidence. Mother, Alyssa's posture is fine. She's not attending a debutante ball. My dad, Raphael, says, trying to lighten the mood with a half-hearted chuckle. Raphael, please. Grandmother snaps without missing a beat. I'm merely ensuring our family's reputation remains intact. A Milano never slouches. I shoot a look at my mom, Rosalie, who offers me a quiet, reassuring nod. It's her silent way of saying, I've got your back, but with grandmother Mia, that's easier said than done. Later that evening, I escape to my room and flop onto my bed. My phone buzzes, and a smile spreads across my face. It's Paul, my secret boyfriend. You won't believe what my grandmother said today, I type, rolling my eyes just at the thought of it. 2 moments later, he replies. Let me guess. Something about the Milano family reputation? I chuckle out loud. Bingo. Sometimes I think she's trademarked that phrase. Paul texts back almost instantly. Well, my grandmother Haley had some choice words about the Milanos today, too. When will this feud end? Ah, yes. The infamous Milano-Leary family feud. It's like Romeo and Juliet, except with more designer handbags and fewer tragic love poems. You see, Paul's grandmother, Haley Leary, is grandmother Mia's lifelong rival. Apparently, this all started decades ago over a disagreement about which family deserved the spotlight at a charity gala. Ridiculous, right? But here we are, generations later, still trapped in their rivalry. Alyssa, come down for dinner, my mom calls from downstairs. I sigh, quickly deleting my messages with Paul, because, trust me, if grandmother Mia ever found out I was dating a Leary, it would be a scandal of epic proportions. The dining room is grand, as always, a polished mahogany table that's probably older than me, crystal chandeliers that look like they belong in a palace, and an air of tension that hangs heavy no matter how fancy the setting. Did you hear about Haley Leary's latest charity event? Grandmother Mia sneers, her disapproval as sharp as ever. As if throwing money around makes up for her lack of class. Here we go again. My family's drama could fill an entire season of a reality TV show. I chew my food quietly, letting their voices blur into background noise as I zone out, dreaming of a life far away from this. You see, for as long as I can remember, my path has always been paved for me. I've been told what to wear, how to speak, where to go, and who to associate with. The Milano name comes with prestige, but it also comes with invisible shackles. But here's the thing. I'm not just a Milano. I'm Alyssa. I have my own dreams, my own goals, and yes, my own love, even if it's with someone my family would never approve of. Paul sees me for who I am, not for the title I carry, and that means everything. Over the next few days, I find myself at a crossroads. Graduation is so close I can taste it, and with it comes a choice. Do I continue down the path my family expects me to take, polished, perfect, and suffocated? Or do I step off this gilded road and find my own way, even if it means disappointing the people I care about? For the first time in my life, I feel brave enough to ask myself, what does Alyssa Milano want? It's a question that will change everything. This is my story. The story of how I stopped being the golden child and started being me. I bite my tongue, resisting the urge to defend Paul's family. Instead, I focus on my plate, pushing around the organic kale salad that's sitting untouched in front of me. Now, Alyssa, Grandmother Mia's sharp voice cuts through the quiet tension, turning her attention fully on me. Have you given any thought to which law firm you'll be interning at this summer? I've spoken to Aiden Gillen, and he's more than willing to put in a good word for you at his son's firm. I pause, my heart racing, but I gather every ounce of courage I can muster. Actually, Grandmother, I begin, my voice shaky but determined. I've been thinking about taking a different path after graduation. Maybe exploring nonprofit work. The silence that follows is deafening. It feels as though I've just announced I'm running away to join a traveling circus. Nonprofits. Grandmother's voice is dangerously low, dripping with disapproval. Alyssa, dear, Milanos do not do nonprofit. We lead. We succeed. We dominate. Her words land like heavy stones, each one designed to crush my resolve. I feel my courage waver under her piercing gaze, but then I think of Paul and of the life I want. A life where I decide who I am and what I do, not one that's been mapped out for me since birth. I understand, Grandmother, I reply, my voice surprisingly steady. But I believe there are many ways to lead and succeed. I'd like the chance to find my own path. The tension in the room is suffocating. My parents exchange worried glances, caught between wanting to support me and fearing the consequences of standing up to Grandmother Mia. As I lay in bed that night, my mind races. I know I'm walking a fine line between the life that's expected of me and the one I actually want. But for the first time, I feel ready. Ready to stand up for myself, no matter the consequences. The next day, the Chili's Grill and Bar is a whirlwind of activity. The grand halls are alive with the hum of conversation, crystal glasses clinking as Albany's elite celebrate my graduation. Servers glide through the crowd with trays of champagne, and I stand in the center of it all, forcing a smile as yet another one of Grandmother's friends congratulates me. Alyssa, darling, come here for a moment, Grandmother Mia calls, her voice effortlessly commanding attention. She waves me over to a group of distinguished-looking men in perfectly tailored suits. Excuse me, I say politely to the woman I've been speaking with, my heels clicking across the polished marble floors as I make my way over. Yes, Grandmother? I ask, carefully keeping my expression neutral. Gentlemen, Grandmother begins, her tone full of pride as she gestures toward me. This is my granddaughter, Alyssa. She's just graduated summa cum laude from Albany University. One of the men nods, clearly impressed. Following in your grandmother's footsteps, I see, he remarks. I hesitate for a split second, the weight of their expectations pressing on me like a physical force. I know what I'm supposed to say, that I'm honored, that I'll make the Milano family proud. But instead, I take a deep breath and let the words I've been holding back finally spill out. Actually, I say, meeting their gazes with as much confidence as I can summon, I'm hoping to forge my own path. I'm passionate about nonprofit work and making a real difference in people's lives. The air around us grows still. The men exchange brief, polite smiles, clearly uncertain how to respond. Grandmother's expression remains perfectly composed, but I can see the flicker of frustration in her eyes. Well, that's unexpected, one of the men mutters, forcing a polite smile. Alyssa has always been ambitious, Grandmother says sharply, her voice smooth but carrying an undeniable edge. I'm sure this is just a phase. It's not a phase, I reply softly but firmly. Grandmother doesn't respond. Instead, she gives me a long, calculated look before turning back to the men. I know she'll have more to say later, but for now, I've done it. I've spoken up. As I stand there, surrounded by the hum of chatter and clinking glasses, I feel a mix of fear and freedom coursing through me. This won't be easy. Disappointing Grandmother never is. But for the first time, I know I'm on the right path. My path. And I'm ready to see where it leads. Mia had always been a force to be reckoned with, both in the family and in the business world. I smiled politely, the practiced smile of someone who knows their role, but inside, I felt like I was screaming. This wasn't me. This wasn't what I wanted. As I looked at my grandmother's smug face, Something inside me snapped. For years, I had let her shape my life, dictate my choices, and overshadow my identity. But not anymore. Actually, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, though my hands trembled slightly at my sides. I have an announcement to make. The room fell into a strained silence. Grandmother Mia's sharp eyes narrowed as she turned to face me. "Alyssa, what are you doing?" she demanded, her tone low and warning. But I was already stepping away from her and toward the center of the grand room. The sound of my heels clicking against the marble floor echoed like thunder in my ears. I caught Paul's eye across the crowd. He stood near the far end of the room, his expression a mixture of pride and encouragement. He gave me a subtle nod, and that was all I needed to push forward. "Everyone," I called out, my voice rising above the murmur of chatter. "May I have your attention, please?" Slowly, the room quieted, and all eyes turned to me. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst, but I took a deep breath and stood tall. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate my graduation," I began, forcing a small smile. "But tonight, there's something else I'd like to celebrate." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Grandmother Mia pushing through the crowd, her face contorted in confusion, the first crack in her otherwise flawless armor. The confusion quickly turned to anger as she realized something big was happening, something she wasn't controlling. "I'm engaged," I announced, my voice ringing out clear and strong, "to Paul Leary." The room froze, time itself seemingly suspended. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved, no one spoke. Then, almost on cue, Paul stepped forward from across the room. He moved confidently, his presence grounding me. He reached for my hand, his warm smile reassuring. "It's true," he said, his voice calm and steady as he looked at me with such affection it made my heart swell. "We're in love." The crowd erupted into a chorus of shocked whispers and gasps. "Leary? As in Haley Leary's grandson?" I heard someone mutter. "But the feud! The Milanos and the Learys hate each other," another voice whispered in disbelief. Fragments of conversations swirled around me, but I tuned them all out. My focus remained on Paul and on the promise of the life we wanted to build together. But then I saw her, Grandmother Mia. Her face was a mask of fury unlike anything I had ever seen before. She shoved past the last few people in her way and stopped just inches from me, her eyes blazing with rage. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice low and sharp enough to cut glass. "How dare you embarrass me like this in front of everyone?" "Grandmother," I tried to explain, but she didn't give me a chance. Without warning, her hand lashed out, striking me across the face, so hard I stumbled backward. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the world spun and darkened around me. My knees buckled, and then everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on the floor, my head cradled in Paul's lap. His worried face swam into focus as the sounds of chaos filled the room. People were shouting, some rushing out in a flurry, and my parents were desperately trying to calm things down. "Alyssa, can you hear me?" Paul's voice was tight with concern as he looked down at me. I blinked, my head throbbing. What happened?" I mumbled, trying to sit up. Paul gently held me still. "Don't move. Your grandmother, she hit you. You blacked out for a few minutes. We're taking you to the hospital." I nodded weakly, my mind swimming as the events replayed in my head. My father appeared on my other side, his face pale with worry. Together, they carefully helped me to my feet. My cheek burned, and I winced at the pain, but I stood as tall as I could. The room was still in disarray, whispers and judgmental glances flying everywhere. But as Paul wrapped his arm around me protectively and led me toward the door, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. I knew this moment would change everything for my family, for me, and for Paul. But for the first time in my life, I was ready to face it. Because this time, I was standing up not as a Milano, not as my grandmother's puppet, but as Alyssa. And I would never look back. I saw my grandmother standing off to the side, her face cold and indifferent. There was no anger, no sadness, just an icy detachment that cut deeper than any words she could say. Mother, how could you? My father's voice trembled with fury as he confronted her. She's your granddaughter. Grandmother Mia's lips curled into a faint, dismissive smile. She made her choice, she said coolly. Then, her tone turned steely, each word sharper than the last. She's no granddaughter of mine. Those words hit me harder than the slap that sent me to the ground. As I was led toward the waiting ambulance, I couldn't help but wonder, was this the price of standing up for myself? And if it was I ready to pay it? When I woke up, I was in a sterile hospital room. The scent of disinfectant filled my nose, and the soft beeping of machines echoed nearby. My head pounded, and for a moment, I couldn't remember why I was there. Then, like a floodgate opening, it all came rushing back. The party, the announcement, grandmother's fury. Alyssa, you're awake. Paul's voice broke through my daze, filled with relief. He was sitting by my bedside, dark circles shadowing his eyes, as though he hadn't slept in days. What happened? I croaked, my throat dry and scratchy. You've been out for a day, my mom said softly as she stepped into the room. Her face was pale, worry etched into every line. The doctor said you have a mild concussion. You're lucky it wasn't worse. I try to sit up, wincing at the pain throbbing in my skull. Has grandmother been here? The silence that followed was answer enough. Actually, my dad said, his voice tight with anger, she's been busy trying to control the narrative. It's all over the local news. Paul handed me his phone, his jaw clenched as I scrolled through the headlines. Albany's socialite assaults granddaughter at graduation party. Milano family feud erupts in violence. Engagement announcement leads to hospital visit. Oh God, I whispered, nausea rising in my throat as the reality of the situation sank in. That's not all, Paul said, his voice low and controlled, though I could hear the anger simmering beneath it. Your grandmother tried to bribe me to leave you. She offered me an obscene amount of money to forget this foolishness and disappear from your life. I stared at him, stunned. She was. She also threatened to cut you off financially if you don't come to your senses, my mom added bitterly, shaking her head. In that moment, something inside me hardened. For years, I'd made excuses for my grandmother's behavior. I'd told myself it was her way of showing love, that beneath the harsh exterior there was care and concern. But now, I saw her for who she truly was, a manipulative, controlling woman who cared more about her image than the people who were supposed to be her family. I'm done, I said firmly, surprising even myself with the strength in my voice. I'm done letting her control my life. The next few weeks were some of the hardest I'd ever faced. I moved out of the family home, packing up my things while ignoring my grandmother's threats and guilt trips. I knew she thought I'd break, that I'd come crawling back, but I didn't. I accepted a job offer in San Antonio City, a position with a nonprofit organization I had been too afraid to consider before. The opportunity had always been there, waiting, but I'd let fear and family expectations hold me back. Not anymore. It wasn't easy. Starting over never is. But as the days passed, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time, freedom. Paul was by my side every step of the way. He helped me find a small apartment in the city, just big enough to feel like home, and he offered unwavering support when the nightmares came. Because they did come. Flashes of that night, my grandmother's furious face, the sharp sting of her hand, the cold finality of her words. Maybe I should see someone, I admitted to Paul one night after waking up drenched in sweat. He sat beside me, his hand gently rubbing my back as I tried to catch my breath. You should, he said softly, his voice full of love and understanding. There's no shame in getting help, Alyssa. What you've been through, it's a lot. I nodded, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. For so long, I'd carried the weight of being a Milano, of being perfect. But now, I was ready to let that weight go. In the months that followed, I found myself again. I poured my energy into my new job, helping people in ways that felt meaningful and real. I built a life that was mine, one free of expectations and judgment. My relationship with my parents began to heal as they realized how much I'd sacrificed to make them proud. And Paul stood by me through it all. One day, as I stood on the balcony of my little San Antonio apartment, staring out at the bustling city below, I felt a quiet sense of peace. I had lost so much, my grandmother's love, the security of my old life, but I had gained something far more valuable, myself. For the first time in my life, I was living on my terms, and I knew, no matter what challenges lay ahead, I was strong enough to face them. I think that's a great idea, Paul said softly. I'll go with you if you want. True to his word, Paul was there for me through everything, every therapy session, every panic attack, and every moment when I doubted myself. Even when Grandmother Mia kept trying to break us apart, including a subtle threat to his family's business, Paul stood firmly by my side. Meanwhile, Grandmother's perfect world was falling apart. I heard whispers that some of her business partners had distanced themselves, not wanting to be connected to someone who had hit her own granddaughter. One evening, Paul showed me his phone. "Did you see this?" he asked. It was a video of Grandmother being surrounded by reporters outside her office. "Mrs. Milano, do you have any comments on the assault allegations?" one reporter asked. "Is it true you tried to bribe your granddaughter's fiancé?" Another pushed. "How do you respond to claims that you're using your influence to hide the story?" Grandmother's face was full of anger as she ignored the questions and shoved past the reporters without saying a word. "Karma's a nightmare," I muttered, feeling both satisfied and a little sad. That part of my life was over. 3 years flew by in San Antonio. Paul and I got married in a small, simple ceremony far away from the Albany society pages. It was quiet, beautiful, and exactly what we wanted. We were happy, building a life together on our own terms. Then one day, an invitation arrived. A charity gala in Albany. I hesitated, holding the invitation in my hands. But Paul squeezed my hand reassuringly. "We can handle it. We're not the same people we were 3 years ago." When we walked into the grand ballroom, I could feel the eyes on us, hear the whispers behind our backs. I held my head high and kept moving. Then I saw her, Grandmother Mia. She was standing alone by the bar, looking smaller, less intimidating than I remembered. Our eyes met, and to my surprise, she walked toward me. "Alyssa," she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. It lacked its usual confidence and power. "I'm glad you came, Grandmother," I replied coolly. She glanced around nervously, as if checking who was watching. "I was hoping we could talk. I want to apologize for what happened. I reacted poorly, and I'm sorry." I froze, shocked. An apology for Mia Milano? I never thought I'd hear those words. But when I looked into her eyes, I saw no real regret, only desperation. "I appreciate the sentiment," I said calmly, "but I'm afraid it's too little, too late." Her face fell. "But we're family," she said quickly, almost pleading. "Surely we can move past this." I shook my head, my voice steady. "Some actions are unforgivable, Grandmother. That night, you showed me exactly who you are. And I believe you." Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time, she looked truly defeated. As we stood there, I began to learn just how far she'd fallen. Her company had lost major contracts. Several employees had come forward with lawsuits, accusing her of years of mistreatment and abuse. Her social circle, the very people she once ruled over, had abandoned her. Many of them had even sided with Haley Leary, her lifelong rival. Grandmother Mia, once untouchable, was now alone. As I turned to leave, Paul took my hand, and we walked away together. I felt lighter than I had in years. I realized then that I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad, either. I was free. And for me, that was enough. "I've lost everything," she said, her voice shaking slightly, though the anger I knew so well was still there. "And for what? Because you couldn't follow the plan I had for you." There it was. The mask slipped, and the same old Mia showed herself again. "No, Grandmother," I replied, keeping my voice calm and steady. "You lost everything because of your own actions, your cruelty, your need to control everyone, and your refusal to see people as anything more than pawns in your game." Those were your choices, and now you're dealing with the consequences. She stared at me, speechless for once. I took a breath and continued. I've moved on, I told her firmly. I'm happy. I'm successful. And I'm surrounded by people who truly care about me. I don't need you or your approval anymore. With that, I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. Mia Milano was left standing there alone, a shadow of the powerful woman she once was, a relic of a world that no longer existed. What do you think? Is there a point where family toxicity becomes unforgivable? At what moment in the story would you have walked away from Mia? Or do you think everyone deserves another chance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective could help others going through similar situations.